Thanks, Christian. Yeah, okay, so welcome everyone to the recording and meeting for the May 26, 2021 GitOps Working Group Principals Committee meeting. I'll be your host today. There is one topic that I want to mention I'll write it here real quick. I'll speak it. Okay. So I just put on there's a licenses and principals pull requests. I know we're already on track for this. We, as part of the checklist for merging all the work that we did, that's already ready to be merged for the first pre-release for the principals. That PR needs the repo to have licenses first. Licenses pull request is here. If anyone wants to give that a look over, now would be a lovely time to do it. And honestly, anyone in this group can do that. For the future, ideally, the goal, we'll have a process set up where other maintainers will have to approve a PR before it gets merged, but that has not been set up yet. So as long as we have general thumbs up, then that's fine. Also, Dan is on the call and he is a maintainer, so and Jesse. So if either of you just want to even give an informal thumbs up, it's okay. We don't have to have the pull request gods rain down upon us. We can just, this is recorded, so it's not like we're hiding anything. You can just take a look and see if it just looks good generally. Once it does, we can thumbs up it and merge that, and then I'll merge the.
It's just Apache with a attribution on it. Is that right?
Yeah, there's two licenses: Apache for code and then Creative Commons 4.0 for anything non-code related, like documentation like this or other things. And those are both the CNCF recommended licenses for those. Interestingly, not all CNCF projects have properly demarcated each of those licenses for those. So we're kind of we would be among the smaller group of people who will have done that, but they all probably should.
I just thumbs up.
Cool.
It's fine to me.
You're gonna merge it. Done.
Yay! All right, beautiful. Then ultimately we are ready to merge. I mean, this is kind of fun. Like, if someone else wants to, if one of the, I'll check the little. Oh, you know what? Here, I'll share my screen just to make it really cool for you all. Because I know this is kind of a big deal for everyone. We've been meeting for months about this and reached consensus. Okay, this has been merged now. And then, yeah, so at this point, if one of the other maintainers I can't approve my own PR, but like we already have ultimately done this in advance. So all these approvals, if you feel like doing the honors and hitting the merge button, be my guest.
It says we need, we have 2 reviewers pending. I guess we're okay with that.
Ultimately, yeah, because they've been involved. That was yeah, Chris and Leonardo have been involved the whole time. I just went ahead and asked for a review for all the maintainers. We don't need another official review from all the maintainers because everyone's already signed off.
Okay, it's officially merged.
Oh shit! So that's so that's great. Now the other items on the checklist are. We initially said we didn't really get too specific about exactly what the pre-release is going to be, but we could start with a V0.1.0, just Semver style. Pretty fast follow. We could do if we want to go to things like alpha, beta, but I think that whatever is the simplest for the story to communicate to the public is probably the best, is my opinion, because people have been kind of waiting to understand, what is this group doing anything? Like, are they really working well together? And I think based on this, and even just looking through the commits and these videos, you can see that, yes, we have, and yes, we are moving ahead now. There is, I just want to note, there is, and then I'll shut up and let whoever is next be next. But there was William Bablionia from Red Hat left some suggestions, and I basically just summarized where the process is, and saying that, like, if this, like, we're ready to merge like any moment, and if this gets merged before this is able to be properly reviewed, this discussion, you can just open up a separate PR for that. But I at least wanted to point people to this, and I will link the review so that folks can read what he was they were saying.
By the way, I am William.
Hey, great.
So just wanted to clarify, the intention is, under no circumstances, stop the progress of this at all. Is again, as a discussion for a future, again, please do not stop for this, but for the future, to go and clarify exactly what you put it there. I think is phrasing that into that note, because again, since the notion of taint or tainted is not defined anywhere else, and it has many meanings, I was just trying to point out that, okay? So it's under no circumstances trying to delay anything. So it's just for a future iterations to try to consider phrasing that in a way that has a definition already in it. It's that.
I just want to say I personally love that. In fact, and I don't know if you got to see my response yet, but I would love to, if you haven't read through it, maybe please read through my response, and we could discuss that here with anyone else's viewpoints, or just asynchronously after the fact. So thank you so much for that, because I think you're right, that one note was a little bit rough. But I think we all agreed that, this is a pre-release, and the intention is for these notes to be either folded into the glossary section, or like you said, if taint becomes a glossary term, great. If we decide it should mean something else, great. Or to actually flesh out the principles themselves, and for us not to have a long list of notes otherwise. They could either go into a best practices doc or one of those others. But for now, in this pre-release, we're keeping them there because that was the agreement, and we'll move forward properly.
Those are definitely temporary notes. Like, we can be real clear on that. I think we've been talking about narrative, adding narrative of some kind to the doc, or a parallel doc. So whether it's best practices, whether it's getting started, whether it's narrative, we'll figure it out. But yeah, definitely a lot of that needs to fold in there. We have a lot of that work already done. So it's interesting that this PR just merged and we're like, yay, and it's so small compared to everything else. The work is still there. So just for everybody who might just be tuning in, just coming in, the work is still there. We intend to tease it out and spruce it up and put it in its own doc. So yeah, really a good observation. I will echo what Scott said. Thanks.
That's great. Okay, so I'm thinking this has been like super awesome so far. I'm thinking maybe we should, how does everyone feel about moving back to the kind of like hand raising agenda way of going about this? That way we can know whether or not we're like, cool, we covered all the bases, let's give people back time, or whether we have,
So just referring to, so Scott, just referring to the suggestion in that PR by William, I think that can be written without, you don't even need the word tainted in there. All you got to do is say followed by a reconciliation of the system back to the desired state. And that way, you don't have to take this strange word and give it a definition somewhere, unless you plan to use it regularly.
I thumbs up that personally too.
Because
Just-
it's the first time I've ever heard it. Basically when we're talking about GitOps, we're talking about reconciling a system to the desired state. And if the system drifts, I mean, I hear the word drift. I never hear the word tainted to a system, but if it drifts, then yeah, you got to reconcile it back to the desired state. So I think you could write that without tainted. I can add a comment in here to the PR.
That would be great. And this since this is PR is merged, I mean, yeah, you could, yeah, that would be great if you want to add that, because we can refer back to this in follow-up pull requests.
Sure.
That would be awesome. What do you all, okay. Sorry. Christian is next.
Yeah, I don't, this is my, and we can do this asynchronously. This is a comment to what Chris just said. I don't think, I think the note for principle 4 is talking about what if I commit my AWS credentials, I accidentally merged that. That is still the desired state, even though it's not, not desired state in that, like, I don't want it that way. I made a mistake. So it's less, I think, less about reconciliation. I think I do agree tainted is the wrong word, and I do think we can probably take it out. I do want to keep conscious that this is like a break glass situation, right? Like how we need to stop the reconciliation, do something, right? And then turn it back on.
Then, but then, Christian, you expect the system to go back to the declared state, right?
Do I expect to go back to declare once I fix it? Yes.
Yeah.
So I need to turn it back on, right? So I think this is the, and I think this is a great conversation to have. Like we need to flesh out like the definition a bit more.
What I like from the note there is that this helps the customers and anyone using this principles understand that not because you had to disconnect temporarily for any reason and reconnect, it does not mean that you're breaking GitOps as the principles. It's more like, yes, those scenarios exist. You disconnect, you do whatever you have to do, and then it just go back to reconciliating to the way it was doing. It will treat the system as like whatever, just as they want, basically, on the reconciliation. But not because that had happened, it prevent them from saying that this is not GitOps. It's for me, that highlight is important for the customers.
I think the point that I'm hearing though is that if you break glass and have to go and do something to the cluster, that if you want that to become the new state, then you have to go make changes in your Git repo as well, right? If you don't expect that to become the new state and you just needed to fix something or whatever, and once you resume the reconciliation, then it would go back to the state that's declared in Git, right? And it could overwrite something you possibly did during break glass. That's the whole point of GitOps to me, is that you have to have the system in sync with what's in the Git repo.
Cool.
So,
and just as a point of order, I'm gonna let's say remind us now that we have a few hands raised that we should go back to hand raising, but we can just do that in order and they'll show up in order, and we'll give a two minute maximum, so no one feels like their conversation is going to be blown away. I'm next then Moshe, and I'll be very short. Yes, Chris, I totally agree. and in that note that I added to the bottom of the link, that the review to William's review, I listed what I thought we had discussed, but I'm not an authoritative voice, or anything. That's my point of view. So if anyone disagrees with the way I summarized it, please, voice your difference of viewpoint there. And before I give this to like the next person, I just wanted to ask if there's anything from this conversation that came up, because I also thought it was a good observation, and we all knew it was a little bit rough, but purposefully okay for the notes temp for now. Do we feel like there's anything that we can mine from this, to anything we can draw from the conversation so far that could then help us ultimately move towards moving that note into something more a more lasting place, into one of the narratives, whether it's the glossary, whether it's a best practice, or whether it's a potential modification. You know, I'm going to lean very much away from that for now, at least before a pre-release, because that was our whole point of doing all these, that we're going to at least create a pre-release, but for follow-up, it's a pre-release so that we can then iterate on this and improve it, right? So if there's anything that we can do to take what you've noticed and make that better, let's discuss it. Anyway, I'm off now, and then it's Moshe, and then Jesse.
Cool. So my comment is really around the going off the beaten path. So like if you're turning reconciliation off and or rewriting Git history or anything like that, like I think we need to be pragmatic and say, people, there are circumstances that you need to do that. But that doesn't change the principles. If you go off the GitOps path, you can come back onto it, but that doesn't change the fact that you've gone off of it. So I don't think we should have a mechanism to say you can go in and turn something off and go against the principle and still be doing GitOps. So yes, you might need to not use your principles at some point, but it's the same with any like security type thing. You have security principles and you follow these principles, and if you break those principles, then you're no longer doing something secure, and that's fine. Sometimes you're required to do things that are not secure, and you understand that, but that doesn't change the underlying principle. Just yeah, just my 2 cents there.
Thank you, Moshe. I left a comment on there, so I'm not taking up extra time. Basically, I agree. Jesse.
Yeah, I agree too, for the record. I think that is a good summary. I think that there's maybe a bigger picture thing just to call out here, that, yeah, we know we need to get to the narrative work. We know we need to support the principles in context. So I feel like we could now iterate over the notes and find other things to talk about with the notes. Just, I guess, a friendly reminder to the group that the notes are there to remind us of what to cover in the narrative when we get to that piece of work. So definitely it's all valid, really good feedback. Keep it coming. Obviously the PR is merged. Make more comments. I mean, it's basically its state, right? Where we'll have things to refer to. But do keep in mind that I think that that's the goal, is that, okay, now we have these notes, let's massage them into the rest. And one random thing, just because I have the mic, totally agreed with William on the idea of a discussion doc. I'd actually like to see the narrative broken up into topic specific docs. I think having one overview that then links off to particular talking points would be awesome. This is definitely one where we, as this working group, can help the community kind of come to some, I know best practices is no longer in style. We don't like to use that term. I'm going to do it anyway because I'm old. Best practices, right? Like, I think that's one of the things that people are going to be looking for from us. What do I do when I have drift? Is it okay to have sort of these ephemeral, non-compliant, transient states in my system, right? If it's not, what are the guidelines for correcting them? So I think a lot of this plays into those narrative concepts that we need to come, that's sort of like, I feel like that's our next piece of work. Because relatedly, and I don't know, Dan, if you want to bring this, but the website work is just starting to kick up now. And we're going to need to actually give content there. And, at some point we're going to be crossing the streams, right? And saying like, we're all one big party working group. But I think that's the next thing, is really having that narrative coming into scope. And if I have any time left, I yield it. I don't think I do.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, I'll raise mine for a second just to say, I tried to take a few of the notes of the things that you said, but I think that those are good. Are there anything else in the chat, in the Zoom chat? Is there anything else? Do we want to brainstorm here, or what's the most effective way for us to brainstorm that best practices? Because there's nothing stopping us from working on that in a PR while we, or working on it in a separate branch, or even just working on it in a HackMD doc again, while we, as we're even before or during cutting this initial pre-release. We're already at the stage of the pre-release. We've already all agreed to that, but and in fact, you know, I could do that right now, you know, if not moderating. So what do you all think about what Jesse said, and whether or not, and if if you agree that those are worth working on during this meeting, what would be the best way to do it? Did you like the HackMD doc approach again? Should we just discuss and take notes and then compile it later? What do y'all think? I yield. Jesse, I think you're next again, and then Christian.
I'll be short. I'm down with that. I thought the HackMD approach worked really well. My question is for the group, do we think, so in addition to all the questions that Scott asked, do we think we'd be better off starting with a proposed narrative and workshopping, editing, and modifying it, or starting from a blank slate as a team? I think that if we could answer that, then that'll guide us toward what the right first step is.
Thanks, Jesse. Christian, then Moshe.
Yeah, so in general, I did like the HackMD approach. I do want to give the ability for people to do things asynchronously as well. I think what we did last time was really good. We got like a good baseline, and then we put it out there for people to comment asynchronously, and we essentially iterated that way the entire process. I actually like that approach. I think there was a lot of opinions last time. I do think that not starting with the clean slate would be best, only because there was a lot of opinions. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't, and I think having written form would be helpful. So I know that you know, I know William put some time. I know she put some time as well. Scott, you know, various people put some time. I just wonder if there's a cleaner way of doing it. So like a central discussion doc, a central HackMD, you know, open up a standing PR and work via that PR. So this is kind of my thoughts, questions around that.
Thanks, Christian. Sorry, real quick point of order, Moshe, right before. Chris just asked, how do you raise the hand button? Do you see a reactions button at the bottom now, Chris?
I see reactions, but there's no hand raise. I see a clap, a thumbs up, heart, cry.
At the very bottom below it, you don't see hand raise?
Nope.
Maybe you need to update your client next time. But you can just raise your hand like in the air, or just say, oh, hey, you know, and that's fine for now.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. We won't stop you because of the client version.
Awesome.
Okay, Moshe. Cool. So I've spent quite a bit of time in the cluster API group, and I think there was probably about 20 or 30 times as much discussion and debate in that group around many, many different topics. And what worked really well there is a Google Doc, primarily because, and a Google Doc using mob documentation. So you give the email list write access onto that doc, and then people just start writing into that doc, and then you can start commenting on specific sections, on specific words, and have conversations around those specific points that are asynchronous. When doing it in HackMD, I found that very, very clumsy. Like I couldn't even see the comment. So HackMD for the final destination and Markdown for the final destination is okay, but as really a collaboration and discussion tool, it really is subpar in my opinion. Google Docs really works a lot better for that. But that's again just my 2 cents.
Does anyone have an objection? Since no one else's hand's raised, I'll just raise mine for a second. Actually, Chris, did you have your hand raised? Or was that just a question for how to do it for next time? Okay, cool. Just making sure I don't want to override you. Yeah, so does anyone have an objection to starting the content in a Google Doc? I do not have any objection to that, and I agree that would be a great way to go. Personally, I also don't want to bike shed. I don't care the tool as long as it works for us. What do you all think? Feel free to speak up.
So I do have one concern is that how does that get written back to GitHub? So we can do it all in a Google Doc as long as like the end result of the Google Doc is moving it to Git. As long as we're not doing this, okay, copy paste, like every week we have to like update the, so as long as like the standing PR is look at this Google Doc as we work on it, I'm okay with it. So let me lower my hand.
Okay, cool. Then I'll raise mine for a second. I would like to, yeah, I had a thought about that as well, because I ended up doing the the Git commit stuff, with all the co-authorship and everything, and that all worked out great. I've done a lot of that in the past, and it worked out great for this. It was essentially like signing the Declaration of Independence or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like each little capitalization was this person did this and this. There was some of that to begin with when they were commits, but once we worked inside of a shared collaborative document, again, whether it's HackMD or Google Docs, whatever, it then at that point, all of that was shared co-authorship as we had suggested and everyone agreed to. No one had a problem with, at least. So, but my thought for like the quicker feedback loop this time, to your point, Christian, is that we can make commits with the correct co-authorship for who was on each call, and when we want to do this in synchronized meetings like this, and that'll just be the responsibility. Someone will take the responsibility to compile that after each meeting. It doesn't have to be me; it could be any of us, and we can add that to that repo, even if it's on our own fork, because someone else can cherry pick that in, as long as they know who to add the correct co-authors, and then we're good. At least that's what I was thinking, and that way we'd have a quicker feedback loop in the pull request, and that way other people could then contribute more on the pull request level as a normal pull request, kind of like adding code comment suggestions and things like that, as opposed to having it relegated only to comments and conversation. It could really be both. That was my thought. Any objections or any other thoughts? Cool, dude. All right, so then all right, so we like talked about process and stuff. So sounds like we're not like freaked out about process. Who wants to look at some best practices at this point, or the glossary or anything like that? What do you all think? Or do you want to just say, hey, look, we've had enough for this right now and we want to take a break. We'll see you next meeting. Any desires? Christian?
So I do have a question, and this is actually a question directed at Moshe, because he's the one that brought it up last time, and this is the reason why William's here, because because we had actually had a deep conversation about this. So in one of the notes, I forget which one, I believe it's notes for 3, about the reconciliation loop, about the control loop. Moshe indicated that it is an open-ended control loop, while I'm not entirely convinced that it's an open-ended. I actually think it's a close-ended after speaking with William a little bit, but I would like to, I want to hear, because I'm not actually convinced one way or another from Moshi. So I guess it's a question to Moshi directly, is why the reconciliation loop is an open-ended loop versus a closed control loop.
So when I say closed loop, that means that there's feedback built into the system about what's actually happening. So I apply something, I don't just apply it all the time. I'm actually looking at the result of what I'm applying, and then applying some function to back off or to cancel or something like that. So I'm not doing something blindly. And a good example of this would be creating something via an API that just creates new instances all of the time, and they completely fail, and then you can explode something because you're not actually looking at the result. Most of the reconciliation loops that happen in like if you take Kubernetes, for example, most of those are closed loops inside Kubernetes. Where it's an open loop is on the GitOps process itself. So if I commit something into a Git repo, and I'm using something like Flux, for example, to apply that into a cluster, there's no feedback from Flux back to the Git state to say, I have applied this thing successfully, or I've applied this thing successfully in these different places. You have no idea of knowing. You have to build some type of alerting or monitoring inside the actual reconciliation loop to give you feedback that something is wrong. And that's why I say it's an open loop. And to close it, you need to bring the feedback back onto the Git commit to say, on this Git commit is actually being deployed in these environments. And you can do that with a Git tag or GitHub environments or GitLab environments or anything like that. But if you don't know the state of that application, then it's open.
Thanks, Moshe. Jesse, did you want to chime in on this?
I think this speaks to, so I think William is probably going to get specific, which is great. I have a higher level, more abstract observation about this. I think one of the things that we're going to need to get really crisp on is what part of the system we're talking about for a given state. So this seems to me, this sounds like when we'll use Kubernetes, for example, I say, there's a deployment YAML, there's a specification in YAML, it goes into Git, we apply it to the cluster. There's a deployment object, there's a replica set that comes online in the API. There are a number of one or more pod objects that instantiate, containers then spin up. There's nothing in the Git repo that explicitly lays out that actual state. The desired state is implied. And I think we're bumping up against that here too, as far as whether it's an open or closed loop. It depends on the context of the system. For me, if I'm using Flux, for example, it could be any tool. I'm looking at the desired state coming into actuation at Flux. And that certainly is monitorable. You can have dashboards for that. You can have logging. You can have any sort of thing. And whether or not we want to get implementation specific there, I think is a question for like more narrative. But I think that overall, I think that's something that we're going to have to tackle sooner than later, because we're going to keep tripping over it ourselves as a group. Definitely will confuse folks looking for guidance from us.
Thanks, Jesse. William.
Yes, actually, it's a similar comment on that. So if we decouple this from the actual implementation, because there's a GitOps controller there with a reconciliation cycle, it means that it will follow everything. And we focus on the domain or the scope of that reconciliation cycle, then we could probably then provide more guidance and let's say the reconciliation cycle that is happening there, for example, yeah, there are tools that just write, but there are other tools that actually go and measure and see, okay, this is the delta and only apply the delta. So to classify that action, from the GitOps perspective as an open and close might be more implementation specific. And then if we just scope it to, again, the scope of the action, it might be a different. At the end, and the reason initially I started this conversation with Christian was because I'm in the telco world, okay? So everything that I do is telecommunication and things like that. And there are very specific definitions for these words and this phrase. And I just wanted to make sure that whatever is put here does not conflict there. So that's because, again, there's an established industry and we want to make sure that they see a path and not a wall, basically. That was the intention of that.
Cool, thanks, William. Moshe.
Yeah. So the closed loops that actually happen after flux does something, and you're handing off that state to another system to do another reconciliation loop. For me, that's kind of really out of scope. What for GitOps, that the GitOps loop is, if I make a commit, merge it, and then I come and want to make another change and another commit, and now I'm going to make a commit on a commit, but I have no idea whether that commit has actually been applied yet. So I don't have any feedback on that. Like, in order for it to have a loop, that loop needs to be inside the place where you're applying that change. So if I want to update something, I should know that what I'm updating is actually the current version and there's no drift or there's no failure somewhere along the line. And you can monitor externally and all sorts of things you can do. But ultimately, if I want to make a change, I should be able to know whether A, that change was successful, and B, whether the previous change was successful, and whether I'm making a change into an inconsistent state or not. And kind of, I think that's the scope of where I think the closed loop applies, not so much in the application of the state, more at the introduction of state change.
Okay, thanks, Moshe. And Chris, I see your non-virtual hand. You're next.
So it seems like at core, GitOps is open, right? That's the basic implementation, and it looks like there's many different ways you can close it. And I think that falls in the realm, in my mind, of things like best practices and reference architectures and things like that. There's various ways to try to close the loop there.
I'm gonna lower my hand. I had I'll have a note to make about this kind of stuff afterwards, but I'll let you all go. I think Moshe was next again, and then William.
No, I think my hand was still up. Sorry.
Oh, okay. William.
Okay, in going back to where we're measuring this. So if Git is the source of truth, roughly, if we go into the tools that are known for closed loop reconciliation, that is replacing the traditional database. The traditional database is not the one receiving the feedback, is the controller. The controller that is taking that source of truth, which is in the traditional tools are proprietary database, etc. That's the tool that is doing the reconciliation and is seeing the feedback, not the database. So from that perspective, that's the mapping I'm doing here. Git is the source of truth, which happen to be really open and not a proprietary format, but the controller acting on it has a one-to-one mapping to the traditional one in terms of functionality. So that's it. Again, depend on where we look at it and how. But that was my my comment on there.
Okay, thanks. And I think this is a second hand raise, right, Moshe?
Yeah. So I think if we're talking about this in the context of Git as a source of truth, so I don't think that's the scope that we're applying it at. It's more of GitOps as the control system. So GitOps is this higher level controller that includes these technical and social or human elements. And it's that system that we're closing the loop around, not specifically Git as a source of truth. So Git as a source of truth and the implementation of statehood, I think those are subcomponents or subsystems inside of the greater GitOps system, which comprises all of these things, and it's the closed loop over that entire system that I think is relevant.
Thanks, Moshe. Okay, so my note is only going to be, I'm super interested in this, but I'm disciplining myself to, not to say that we should stop this conversation, it's super interesting, but I just want to ask you all about the context of the conversation now. My thought is that, oh, actually, Moshe, here, I'll lower your hand. My thought is that this will be relevant when this will be relevant to this committee when items from the previous recommended narrative are discussed for bringing back in, because we had started discussing things about loops so far. And I'll just share my screen for a second. So far, we don't have any such. We have not one mention of loops in any way in the principles or the notes. So this is not really relevant to the current status, but I understand as Jesse was saying, we have a lot of work that's been there that has been done, some of which may be non-contentious in any way, some of which we might have a lot of debate around. I'm glad you brought this up though, because I know this question about what kind of a loop are we even really talking about, what the context is, that was something that was contentious before. We've circumnavigated that by just remaining agnostic within the principles about what kind of a loop we're even talking about, or even referring it to that as a loop at all. A loop is a thing that helps the rest of these principles as described function. And by the way, Moshe, I like the way you described the context there. I'm not sure what the best place is, but I just want to say I suspect that when adding some of that back in, it would probably be really good in the glossary section. That's my intuition, I guess. It's just my opinion as well. So, but my opinion is really based on a kind of intuition, thinking about where these concepts are going to come in handy and be useful for other people. And I think one thing I mentioned, and just before sort of handing this off to whoever is next, which I guess no one's raised their hand yet, but in the comment here about my reply to William's comment, I made one note, and I think this is true, that since these GitOps principles are meant to be applied broadly and specific use cases will build on them, we're being very careful not to assume anything about specific systems or tools within the principles or the notes so far. I think we've all agreed to that. That was my paraphrased memory of the spirit of what we're doing with this meeting. And so I think I wanted to agree with what Chris said just a little bit before then too, or just give my super thumbs up as well, that this question might really depend on the tooling that we're talking about, the specifics of the tooling. And I really appreciate what Moshe said too, just recently, because it really also how we describe, excuse me, we may use terminology from systems theory to describe different parts of this entire process. Whether we're talking about GitOps as a whole that includes the human and machine processes, whether we're honing in just on the controller, whether we're honing in just on the source of truth, whatever that may be, that relates to principle. Oh God, I got to memorize these now. That relates to principle 2, immutable desired states, or whether we're describing like just a part of a subsystem and not the whole system itself. That's the actual state we're discussing. So I guess I'm summarizing the things I agreed with, and also to say that I'm not sure what the next step is with this conversation, except perhaps for someone to volunteer to work on some glossary items. What does anyone else think about that? I'll stop sharing my screen. Or are we just happy to have had the conversation in the public that we can always revisit later when and if we get to that?
It seems like doing this in a glossary is fine, someplace where the information is. I mean, we felt it was worthwhile talking about for quite a while. So I think others would find it useful too.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Jesse?
Yeah, that just might be another planning decision. Like, I think a glossary is great. I think an entire reference document is probably in order. That accompanies the principle. I mean, we knew this starting out, right? We knew that the principles, it's like, 4 principles, easy peasy. We know that the devil's in the details, and we know that the most value we add is in all of the support around them. So I love the idea of a glossary. I think, I don't know if this is, I've never worked in a committee like this. Like, I worked in open source working groups that are just sort of like more chaotic and like more, so I don't know if we want to put like a project plan together or like what we think the deliverables should be, but I feel like that might be helpful just so we know what we're working toward. Because I'd love to know that what's in my mind is in your mind too, and that we're all working toward the same thing. Because glossary sounds to me like a markdown file that's like glossary.md. That's a good start. I feel like we have to tick all the types of docs here, right? Like tutorial, narrative, reference. So it might be something we're talking about, or maybe we talk about that on Slack more asynchronously over the next week, and then revisit it next week. Maybe that's an agenda item for next week.
Thanks, Jesse. I think, Chris, you are next.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how do we plan to store these artifacts, and how does that relate to the Open GitOps project? Go ahead, Scott.
I can help with that just because we've discussed it a bunch, and the best thing I can do is share my screen again, and excuse me, go to the GitOps working group description. Okay, this is actually a big PR. Okay, let's just go back to the README of this repo. So I just wanted to say this is what we have so far, as discussed. There is one other place where this is spelled out a little bit more in depth. That is still a pull request because it's paired with some other things. It's basically bringing the charter back in, and that's paired with governance. So that PR is still open, and that's being, I think the schedule is that's being reviewed this week. So it was being reviewed last week, but we all had things came up that came up, including myself, and so we're looking at that this week too, and I can point you to that PR. But for now, it's this: the focus of the GitOps working group is to clearly define define a vendor-neutral, principle-led meaning of GitOps. It will establish a foundation for interoperability between tools, conformance, and certification. And then this is the last part that relates so far to the Open GitOps project: is lasting programs, documents, and code are planned to live within the Open GitOps project. The main reason that we distinguish those two things is that CNCF working groups are not meant to be forever. They're meant to be around as long as they're necessary. That's why I think when Alexis was recommending initially that we really jumpstart with the GitOps working group and jumpstart the process for having a sandbox project as well, even though we didn't quite have a name for it yet, and we just kind of reused the GitOps working group temporarily. It was important to have a place where there would be lasting things that were not meant to be temporary. That this is a project that's ongoing. And so, Chris, I think I don't know if you had a more specific question, because I think the specifics we haven't exactly figured out yet, but we do have some, but exactly what those documents and code and programs are, we do have some pointers to those that were in the initial Google Doc that you were part of.
Yeah, so I guess if what we're talking about is going to live forever in this Open GitOps project, then when we're talking about things like glossaries and tutorials and all that kind of stuff, that implies a structure to something within Open GitOps, and probably eventually to a website too, that draws content from the Open GitOps project. And I wonder where the thinking is around that. You know, how to structure this information. If that's happening, has it already happened, or what's the story there?
Well, I can point to this, and then I can probably defer to, I mean, I could describe it, or someone else could, but I would defer probably to Dan, since if you're still around when discussing the website, because I think Dan has been leading the website team for now. And, but right now, in terms of the documents, we had agreed as a team to rename the principles repo just to documents for now, because some of these documents should be, as we're going to be making releases, pre-releases and so on, they should be released together. So a glossary, right now we have it literally inside of the same file as the principles. As this gets longer, we may not want that. We may want to hyperlink between the principles and the glossary, but either way, those should all be released together. Because, for example, the discussion that we had, that Moshe had brought up about the use of the word continuous, that we ultimately realized, agreed as a team to move into the glossary. If those were released separately from the principles, they would be out of sync. So that's why we have just one documents directory. The idea generally, I can just say, is that the website is intending to draw from this and perhaps other repositories. But in terms of how that goes, if there's any more specifics, then someone else could address that. So I think Jesse's next, and I don't know, Dan, if you're on, and if you have specifics afterwards to describe, but that's all I've got. Jesse.
Sorry, you said what I was going to say. I meant to lower my hand. So just
okay, cool. Sorry, I could have deferred to you. I didn't realize.
Yeah, I'm online if you want me to give a quick overview of what's happening with the website right now. Yeah, okay. So with the website, we have a pretty simple structure in plan right now. Basically, we have a homepage. We have an about, talk about governance and history, links to press releases and stuff, which we imagine will be coming out. Community for getting involved, member companies. We want to have a way for people to basically say that, hey, we're part of this open GitOps standard, we're into it. Some get involved, Slack, GitHub repos, calendar. Patterns is not going to be ready in the next 2 weeks, but the other stuff should be. Patterns is basically a place where people can document their setups. They can say, here's how I've built this with AWS and Flux or Argo or whatever, and here's how it's all set up, and here's like a working diagram, and basically a inspiration that people can use. And we imagine that people can submit these and share them and say, make comments and debate them or whatever. And then we have events for calendars and links to upcoming events. And that's basically the structure. So there's actually not a blog on here right now. Maybe there should be. Could add that. It's probably a good idea. Blog.
+1.
So yeah, the homepage should have the principles on it. As they get longer and stuff, as we have a glossary, I think there'll be child pages on the principles. But to start off with it right now, it feels like we have enough. Like it's relatively short enough that we can probably just fit it all on the homepage. On the homepage, you can see most of this content's like placeholder-ish, but introduction to what GitOps is, prompt to read the principles or get involved, and then showing GitHub stars and encouraging people to share stars there. Some social proof where we'll have the member companies listed and hopefully lots more to link to for that about page. Then the principles on there, and you can see this is the older, shorter form version. So if as it gets longer, we might need to summarize it and then have a read more link to it. Then upcoming events, and then past events and recordings, and then the menu. So right now this has been sent to design. So they're working on it, and I'm hoping that we can have it up in the next 2 weeks.
Thanks, Dan. That's awesome. And that's super relevant. I know this is not an event or a website meeting, but that's super relevant to how the principles will be communicated. So. It is 3:59. It does not sound like we have a burning issue at the end here. So I was going to say that the action item that we said that was going to happen last week, I did not actually do that because we hadn't merged it until just now. So that action item will be carried over, and we will release the first pre-release, the V 0.1.0 pre-release. We'll mark it as a pre-release in GitHub. And we can then, I think the most important thing is that the communications team and the principals committee people, as much as possible, we communicate well about how we're going to socialize this, because it probably will be good news to spread around. So I think there was already in the events committee, this was just discussed in the last meeting that butt up right against this one. And then let's continue on Slack if for whoever's interested asynchronously to just discuss if you have opinions about how that gets socialized beyond just the GitOps working group repository, or excuse me, the GitOps WG Twitter handle, blasting out this awesome news once that tag is there. Making some copy perhaps for each of us to put in our company blogs or to retweet. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. It's 4:01. Any other last words, or are we just saying goodbye? I think it's going to be a goodbye.
Good. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right. See you next time and on Slack. Bye.
Cheers.